Okay, electrical testing. This is a ground wire. This is what's supposed to be inside your wiring harness, but in a smaller version. Same principle. Now I have my multimeter set up to a sound test, a tone test. Basically, I have the black connected and nothing here, so there's an open area there where nothing can flow through it. Once I touch this, it's showing that the current's going through there and connecting to this. That lets you know that there's an ability for electricity and current to flow through there. So you'll hear the tone. Okay, knowing that, I'll come back and show you how that's pertinent. Okay, going to my grounds list. I'm going to look for GE1 and GE2 just because I've already looked at this, so I know what I'm looking for, but this is for reference. Okay, this is your engine compartment right here, a diagram of it. I am looking for two grounds that are side by side, GE2, GE1. These two that are side by side. That controls, as you can see, the grounds for all the sensors inside the engine here. This is basically the engine wiring harness. So, knowing that, these are going to be the two that we're doing. GE1, GE2 for reference. I'll just say left and right, 1 and 2. I'm going to do some testing and show you what I have found. Okay, battery is disconnected. I'm just using just the harness inside this engine compartment. Let me zoom back to one. Just what's contained in this engine compartment for the various sensors. So with the battery disconnected, I'm going to go from that battery ground, which is the negative terminal, to the body ground and touch. So you know that the body ground is good to the engine from the batteries. Now I'm going to go to the diagram and show you a few things and then come back. Okay, so now I am on my ground distribution page on the all data wiring schematic. As you can see, ignition coils 1 through 4 have a blue and white signal wire. They come down, these little black dots are the ground. They all share a ground. Their dots mean they're tied into one ground. And as you see, it's GE2, top, center, rear of engine. That's the GE1 and GE2. So that would be the right hand side one. Now I'm going to go to that ground, and from that ground right there, I've pulled ignition coil number 3, and I am going to put this probe inside on the blue and white wire on the back side, and you're going to hear the tone. One moment. Apologies, I'm doing this with one hand, so. Okay, so here's the blue and white. Come on, there we go. You will also see it zero out. That tells you that it's good. Continuity, the ability for electricity to flow through this wiring. So knowing that, that means GE2 is a good ground. Inside here is a couple wires wrapped. They come back and they run through the harness down to the ignition coil. So that tells me that that ground has got a good signal. Okay, so ground 1, GE1, which is the left ground, has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ground wires attached to that little eyelet that I'm going to show you that control various things. 3 of them, all 5 of them actually, run directly back to the main computer. That's the ECM, electronic control module, under the dash. So these are just the various pin numbers at the computer that I would test with the wiring connector that they're in. Down here it says they're all centrally located in one spot. They come together, black and yellow wires that all tie in. Now if you follow those, they go to things like your oxygen sensors, your crankshaft position sensor, and your NOx sensor, and your throttle. So on a no start, one of the first things I always check for when I have spark and fuel is the crankshaft position sensor. It has to talk to camshaft position sensors. They communicate to tell the car when to start. So this is very vital in the starting of a car. So if you follow the ground back, it's tied in with all of these on that left hand side one, GE1. So on that principle, Doing what I just did with the injection coils, I should be able to go to that ground, go to the sensor, find the signal wire, and touch it and get that same tone. Okay, so now I'm on the left-hand side one. I've tucked the right-hand side GE2 down out of the way. So I'm on the left-hand side one, and this is the crankshaft position sensor here. This is the knock sensor here. Both of those it's stated on the diagram are tied in with it. Both of them are 2 wires. I'm going to probe both of them just to show you. Remember, there's no battery disconnected here, so you can't do any damage to anything. You're just testing the ability for electricity and current to flow through the wires. So knowing that, now I'm going to turn my machine back on. I'm going to come to these 2 pins, and I'm going to touch them both on the metal. Nothing. No tone whatsoever. And it also says OL, which means outside limits. There's a break or a short in that wiring in that ground. So knowing that I'm connected to number 1, knowing that connects to here, touching both of these metal to metal, getting no response. Now I'll go to the crank sensor. Same thing, both pins. The metal is a little bit more difficult to reach here, but I can get metal right there. And I can get metal right through there. There we go, I felt it touch metal. Nothing. Still connected, still outside the limits. Also tied in with that is your cam position sensors. Like I said, this talks to this to tell everything to sync up for the car to start, for the vehicle to start. So, I've unplugged that right there. It's this connector. Signal wire. I'm just going to show you all 3. I'll touch all 3 and it gives me nothing. I am touching metal. Nothing. Into the metal. No tone. OL. Touching metal. OL. No tone. Still connected to the ground. None of these are showing that ground is good. And like I said, there's 5 grounds inside there that control various things just in this engine compartment. Now, the way this harness works, for every sensor on the engine, it's tied in with this big harness, and there's a plug right here. So when I do the engine, all I have to do, inside the car is your computer. It sends a signal through here to this pigtail. It plugs into here. So all I do is unplug that, set it aside, undo these T-bolts, lift this up, and then just disconnect every sensor. Then take this bolt off and this bolt off, and this harness all lifts out as one piece. You don't have to really mess with the wiring harness too much. It's all contained, held down with 2 bolts there and 2 bolts there. You lift it up and out of the car. My belief, because she's had the alternator issue, and that connector, I showed her the picture of it when I went to undo it, looked like it had gotten really hot, almost cooked like it was about to catch fire. Being that she'd had the battery and the alternator replaced, I'm not sure that they were aware there was a grounding issue. When you get stability control, traction control, cruise control, alternator lights on the dash, various things can cause that, and most of the time the first thing you head for is a charging issue, because when a battery or alternator is failing, each of these sensors has a little bit of an electrical draw that it has to see. So when it goes down below a certain threshold, those sensors don't get the voltage they see, and they kind of go wonky saying, hey, we're not getting the voltage. You'll start getting the lights on the dash. So that's probably why they went to the alternator and battery. And indeed, the alternator was probably failing because it had been smoked. Now, trying to reverse engineer this, I'm thinking that now that I can see these 5 grounds inside this tape that control various things come through here, I'm thinking when I lifted this up to get the wiring harness out, wherever that kink was in there, there's probably a short or a ground, And if I were to sit here and wiggle enough, I'm quite sure I could probably get that signal to come back. But when they did the alternator, none of this stuff got disturbed. This was all just left. They just came and did this alternator, took it out, put it back. Now, unfortunately, to take the heads off, I have to take this harness off. I don't have any choice. It has to come out for me to be able to access to get everything out. When I lifted it out, that wire that shorted in there probably touched and arcs out something, or is at a point where it's not connecting now, and that's why I'm not getting signal. That's why it was running when it came, and now it's not. There's not a lot that can really go wrong except for a grounding issue. And now that I'm getting the backstory with the lights on the dash, the alternator, the sporadic performance of different things, I'm starting to believe that. Now I'm going to show you how these grounds go back to the computer, and the computer needs that ground for certain signals to be able to communicate to this. It said there was errors in here. This is the ABS motor, but it also controls your traction control, and your what you call your vehicle dynamics control. This wiring harness communicates to the computer inside there, and they need to see certain signals in order to work. So when it doesn't see that signal, this thing starts throwing the stability control, all those type of codes that come on the dash. So there's probably been a communication error between these two that's been rearing its ugly head. It's just that because you didn't know what was going on, and maybe that stuff wasn't communicated to them, or they didn't know, they just went to the alternator instead of the root of the problem. So I'm just going through basically and showing how there's no ambiguity here. You can see that that ground is not giving signal to certain things, but there is an oddity. So once I do this and touch that down, actually what I'll do, hang on, I'm going to secure a bolt in here really quick. Okay, so knowing at the very beginning how I tested the battery, even though it's not connected, I take the battery ground to the body ground here to show you that was good. So now I've secured the bolt to the body as it would be when it's running. This is going to be connected when it's running. Now I'm going to come back up to my camshaft position sensor, touch metal, nothing, nothing, nothing. Still OL, no tone, still connected. Okay. Making everything equal, I bolted down GE2 to the engine. Now that we know that that body ground was good from that test, now that I'm ground as if the car was running, and I knew that isolated without it bolted down to the engine, I had signal and tone. Now I'm bolting it down, I should still get that same tone. So there we go. Okay, here's where it gets a little bit more complicated and you really have to follow, because this is not in layman's terms. This is the engine control module underneath the dash inside the car. So you've got pins for wires that come out and the colors of the wires. So it's showing me these numbers, B21 and E2. Those are connectors. When you see these two half moons, that means there's a split there. This is on one harness, the B21. The E2 is the second side of the harness. So like this wire here will come out of the computer at pin 30 as a yellow and black wire, and then it splices into another connector and becomes pin number 5, and it'll be a yellow wire instead of yellow and black. Same thing with this one, pink and black, and then it becomes a white and green. So when they plug in, you should be able to look at one side of the connector and see a pink and black wire. The corresponding pin on the other side should line up with that white and green. Now, knowing that, I'm going to go look at B21 and E2 and show you those two connectors. B21 is going to be 54 pins or poles. It's going to be a black connector, and it's in area B3 on the schematic, which is right here. I'm gonna go B3. I am looking right. Where did it go? One moment. I might be on the wrong one. Hang on one second. Let me square this away in my head. Okay. I just got the number backwards in my head. B21 is what I'm looking for. It's going to be right here next to B22. It's going to be 54 pins and a black connector. Right there. Black connector, 54 pins. If you flip it over and look, if you were to count them, there's 54 pins inside here. Now, the corresponding side, how I was explaining, you should be able to follow a wire and watch it switch color. This is B21. This is going to be E2. 54 pins, and it plugs in. So this is coming from the computer. This is going to the engine where they connect. Okay, I've kind of regressed a little bit, but I wanted to show you something that I found in the process before I forget. You'd mentioned the oil light. So, engine oil temp sensor, blue and white wire coming out, pin number 41, and then the corresponding wire should be brown. So it's a blue and white on the engine side, brown on the computer side. That's going to control that oil light. So I'm going to show you that. Here is B21, that connector that I was talking about. 54 pins. We're looking for pin number 41. So it's going to be third row up, 1, 2, 3, furthest to the right on the black connector. Furthest right 3 rows up is 41. Okay, so we're looking for that brown wire right there. 1, 2, 3 rows up, furthest to the right, brown wire. So when I plug it in, instead of being 3 rows furthest right, it's going to be 3 rows furthest left. So 1, 2, 3 rows up, furthest left. And as I touch it, nothing. That pin also looks very loose. It moves considerably more than these other ones. They move, but they're pretty stout. Okay, see, there you go. Now I've got ground there. That's for whatever component is on that, but this is for that oil pressure switch. So there's nothing there. I'm ground right there, and as you can hear, I get ground for other components like that, but that engine oil pressure is dead. So there has been an issue inside here. That tells me that something's going on inside here. Now, is it coming solely on this side, or is there the possibility that the brown wire this side is also causing an issue coming back from the computer? The reason that would be important, if this ground problem is originating on this side from the computer inside here, that means that computer, certain pins aren't going to get the ground they need to be able to send an electrical signal. Now that computer has to communicate to this, which is tied in with the traction control, immobilizer, and all that to be able to start. So if I've exacerbated this grounding issue by moving that wiring harness, which, I mean, I feel horrible, but there was nothing I could really do. I have to get that harness out. I unplug everything and lift it out. It just happened to be that there's a break somewhere that has moved now, and now it won't connect back. So I'm not getting the signal from the computer to allow certain things to work. So I wanted to show you one more thing. Okay, here's where it got odd. Looking at that GE1, that's the left-hand side one, where I was going from there to the crank position sensor. You see how the ground is tied in, okay? So I'm going to go on the E2 side, pins 34, 35, 36, and 37. All of those ground wires right there. I'm going to show you on the diagram here in a second what I'm talking about. Okay, so the B21 is the engine side that plugs into the E2. So on the engine side, 34, 35, 36, and 37 would be 3 rows up, furthest left to there, which means it's going to be furthest right and coming back. Instead of left, I'm inversing in its mirror where it plugs in. So it's going to be left-hand side on this if I were looking at it from the front, but it's going to plug into the right-hand side if I were to take that other plug and look back. So I'm going 3rd row up, furthest right, first 4. Okay, connected to GE1 again, off of the engine. I'm at this connector. I'm so sorry for the camera work. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 rows up, and remember it's furthest right, and it's the first 4. So I'm getting signal from here going through to that ground wire, but I'm not getting signal from the ground wire to the individual sensors. That's an odd one. Something inside this harness is not right. Okay, now I'm engine ground, which is tied in with body grounds, so that should ground and be able to connect to the computer side with nothing connected to the battery. So as we remember, on this one I just tested 3rd row up from the furthest right, the first 4 over, which would be the first 3rd row up furthest this side, going 4 that way. And then pin 41, which was the furthest one over, which was dead for that oil sensor, will correspondingly go to the 3rd row up, furthest one over. Now watch these readings. See if I can tuck that up right there. There we go. Okay, so now I've set it to resistance. That's the amount of impedance inside of a wire, which sounds like blah, blah, blah. But you're going to see a distinct difference here. This is not on this wiring harness side. This is on the computer side now. So I'm going to go to 3rd row up, furthest over there. Shows me 1.4. I'll go to the 2nd. 1.4. 3rd. 1.4. And 4th. 1.4. All 4 of those were grounds off of that GE1. There was one more. There was a 5th one, which was that furthest one over for the engine oil. So I'll go there. Instead of 1.4, I've got 3.2. Watch as I jump back to all of these. I'm going to walk down the line. There's a 4th. There's the 3rd. There's the 2nd. There's the 1st. Back to that furthest one out. Okay. So that brown wire, going back to the oil pressure sensor, the wire is actually bad on this side, on the computer side. That's why you haven't had that oil light for a while. So that's another added feature, because now I'm certain there's something wrong with the harness on this side. But this shows me right here that at least one wire from this computer, at least one signal wire on this side, is significantly off. So I will test a few more on this harness and see what I can find here to see if there's an issue actually ongoing in here.